the world economy on one side, and yet the lower external recognition of the importance of gas, despite the efforts of so many people here. At the Buenos Aires conference 3 years ago, my colleagues who are here now, Michael Stockford and Shankari Srinivasan, developed the notion and conveyed the idea of the voice of gas, that really, in the energy discussions, really gas is not heard the way it should be. Since then, the industry in general and the Malaysian presidency have significantly raised gas's profile and voice, and yet still this kind of perception gap remains. And yet, let's observe how much has happened since affecting the global gas industry since many of us were together in Buenos Aires. Qatar achieved its 77 million ton target. Australia has moved to center stage. Of course, the awful, tragic accident that took place in Fukushima in Japan, and the natural gas industry has responded to meet Japan's very urgent and immediate needs. We've seen the Arab Spring with the upending of the strategic balance and the still developing and reshaping of the Middle East, and with impact on the energy world. We've had something called the shale gas revolution in the United States, and with that has come a collapse in the price of gas. We've also had these deep water plays and amazing major new discoveries in East Africa. And there's the central role of, the central question of what role is natural gas going to play in transportation in the future, taking market share away from oil. Are we turning a corner on that? And let me offer a kind of an overall perspective. Yes, the LNG market is very tight, and yet that obscures what seems to us the real story, which is a growing abundance. And maybe we could describe that as another paradox of natural gas. We know, just if we think back over these last few years, we know that there will be major surprises ahead. But I think we can be very confident that gas will do well, that demand and supply will continue to grow, and that gas will increase its market share. When we do our scenarios, very different scenarios of the future of the world, one thing that's clear in all of them is gas's share of market increases in the energy mix. When we look to the future of supply, we can identify certain key development. One was already underway when we gathered in Argentina in 2009, and namely that was the buildup of the LNG industry. Going all the way back to 2004, we did a report, again led by my colleagues who are here, Michael and Shankari. We called it 40 and 8. We said that we thought that the prospects were there that the natural gas industry would be able to do in the 8 years to follow 2004 what it had taken 40 years to do up until then. In other words, double the capacity, the world's capacity of LNG in 8 years. And that, in fact, is what has happened. It was a pretty ambitious target. It was a pretty daunting target. But as I say, that's what's happened. Now we know that the kind of focus of activity, as I've already said, has shifted to Australia. Today, about 3/4 of all the liquefaction capacity under construction in the world is in Australia, and that's continuing to grow. But then, what comes after Australia? And that's this new emerging generation, next generation of LNG. Very simply, the world is finding a lot of gas, and a large amount of that gas is in areas that were not normally associated with oil and gas development. So bringing on really new sources of supply in new provinces. As we all know, and we've heard over this week, the most dramatic example is what's happening in East Africa, off of Mozambique and Tanzania. And just to give you a number to sort of put a framework around it, 7 out of the 10 largest oil and gas discoveries made in 2012 so far, 7 out of 10 are offshore East African gas discoveries. Now, on top of that, there have been other notable natural gas offshore discoveries since 2009. One that's gotten a lot of attention is the Eastern Mediterranean particularly the Leviathan field in Israel and what's now beginning in Cyprus. Continued development in the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and Brazil, including just discussing with one of the Brazilian delegates here, the gas resources that have been found in some of the pre-salt. That's offshore. Onshore, there's Turkmenistan, where the South Yolatan field last year was upgraded to 400 TCF. If correct, this would make it the second largest gas field in the world. So that's unfolding. These discoveries are being made, they're continuing, but they are on an existing track that we recognize. Then there's something new and transformative, and of course that's called shale gas. I remember, and some of you will remember when we were in Buenos Aires in 2009, there was a very vigorous discussion as to whether this shale gas thing was for real or not. Well, the results are in, and it is a very major thing. It may also seem like something that came like a bolt out of the blue, but in fact it was 25 years, a quarter century in the making. In my new book, The Quest, I tried to, I really wanted to find out how did shale gas, how did it come about? And I tried to explain where it came from. And it's a remarkable story that's known to some Americans, I think, but not to many others. And yet it's a story that's central to the future for natural gas. What's surprising about shale gas development is that it is really the result of the convictions, and the confidence, and the determination of a single man, a man named George P. Mitchell. Name will be known to some in the room. Houston, we wouldn't call him an oil and gas man, we'd call him a gas man. Before he went to work on this, shale gas had another name, actually. It was called uneconomic gas. And in addition to being uneconomic gas, it was also uncooperative gas. And it was just simply thought that it was not commercially possible. But beginning in the early 1980s, George had the conviction that you could get commercial gas out of shale rock. And he pushed his people to do it. And they told him, George, you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time. And he said, well, it's my money, and if I want to waste it, I will. And if you don't want to help me do it, I'll find some other people to do it. So everybody stuck with George. Started in the early 1980s. The first real breakthrough came at the end of the 1990s, and then in 2003, when the hydraulic fracturing was combined with horizontal drilling by Devon, and the race was on. But it was not until 2008 that U.S. natural gas production, which was supposed to continue to go down, suddenly turned the corner and went up. And that's when the bells started ringing that said that something major was happening, and that was 25 years. 25 years after George Mitchell had started working on this. Well, the impact can be measured today in volumes. A decade ago, shale gas was just 2% of U.S. natural gas production. Today, it's 37%. And to the shock and pain of some, it can be measured in prices, with the North American prices now about one-sixth the price of Asian natural gas. And its impact can be measured in scale. Imagine if the shale gas production in the United States was a separate country, the country of shale gas. Where would it rank as a natural gas producer? It would rank as the third largest natural gas producing country in the world after the United States and after Russia. In other words, it is really big. So what are the consequences of this shale gas revolution? Well, there are a few that I'd like to point to. One is the question about the environmental impacts. You hear much about it. In fact, you've seen movies about it, some of you. But perspective is required. A little over a year ago, President Obama, Barack Obama, said, the United States now has this opportunity, 100 years of gas supply. We've got to make sure it's safe. And so he had the Secretary of Energy appoint an advisory committee to look at the environmental aspects of it. And I had the honor and privilege of serving on that committee. And I think the committee's work has been very important in the U.S. dialogue on natural gas. Here is what we learned. First, the scientists said, contrary to what's in the newspapers and in the media, that the likelihood of the small amounts of chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracturing getting into water supply are very, very, very slight. The environmental issues really are different. There are four of them. One, what do you do with the used water, the produced water? Two, make sure the wells are properly drilled. Somebody summarized it this way in 3 words: casing, casing, casing. And that applies not only to shale wells, but to any wells. Third is the question of air quality. And fourth is community impacts, because you have a lot of trucks that come in for a time, you have a lot of noise, dust, and so on. Now, we presented for President Obama 20 pragmatic recommendations about what to do. They included approaches about prudent development, best practices by companies, high standards of regulation, measurement of emissions and water quality, and focus on innovation to address these issues. We see all of these being acted upon very constructively now, and we see industry taking leadership. And one thing that I really see a great deal is this incredible focus on innovation to address each of these questions.